Okay, so going back to the beginning of my channel, which really started when I graduated college pretty much, I had a lot of trouble studying for my technical interviews, especially my really hard technical interviews at larger companies. And so this kind of motivated me to make a video to talk to you guys about some of the mistakes that I definitely made when I first started out studying for technical interviews, and to try and give you guys all that information so that hopefully you guys avoid doing the things that I did, because I really did things totally wrong. So before I tell you guys the 5 different things that I started doing to pass my technical interviews, or what I personally think were the 5 things that really helped me pass my technical interviews and turn around from being a bad interviewer to a good interviewer, I first want to paint the picture of what I did poorly so that you guys can sort of understand if you're in that trap right now, and hopefully you guys can get out of it. So when I was doing my interviews just coming out of college, I made tons and tons of different mistakes, and I kind of want to describe to you guys the mindset I was in, how I studied, and why it was wrong. So when I was studying for my technical interviews, I made the terrible mistake of trying to memorize solutions. And a lot of people, I think, tend to try and do this, or they tend to lie to themselves and say that they actually understand a solution when they've really just memorized it. And I want to paint the picture for why this is really bad. And the reason why this is really bad is because it's effectively gambling. And so you might have a great opportunity to interview with some company, to work at that company, get an offer, and you're basically playing roulette, and you might not even realize it. And so actually by memorizing solutions, you're really just hoping and praying and effectively gambling that you're going to get that same exact question during the interview itself. And that's bad, I think, for 2 different reasons. The first one is plain and simple. You might not actually get that question. And the second reason why it's really not good to memorize solutions is because interviewers can very easily throw a wrench in the problem that will make your solution not work for the problem that you've been asked. And that's a big problem. So my mindset back then was way more of, I'm going to cast a wide net and I'm just going to try and look at the past, 2 years worth of problems that company has asked. And I'm going to try and make sure that I've seen every single one of those questions and I know how to solve every single one of those questions. And that's totally wrong, right? Now we can understand that that's essentially gambling, and any question you get, even if it is a similar question or the same question, the interviewer can make it much harder very easily, and your very rigid solution will not work for what you now have been asked. So now that you guys understand what I was trying to do early on in my career to try and pass interviews, I want to talk to you guys about the 5 different things that I started doing that really made all the difference for me in my technical interviews. And the first thing that I started doing was just setting the right mindset for myself. So once I actually adopted this mindset and understood and internalized that this process was not going to be something that I can learn or gamify in a month, I was much more realistic with how I could actually go about my studying. And so I think the first thing that you guys need to do is adopt that sort of mindset that this is not necessarily something that you can do in a week. And you'll see stories out there of people getting jobs at large companies and they've only studied for a week, or they've only looked at 10 questions on LeetCode. And I just want to say that that's the exception. That's not the rule. I guarantee you everybody who's been hired at large tech companies, that's not the experience that they've had. And I think that those people are few and far between. So I think it really pays to just adopt a mindset of, this might take a while to learn, but it's totally worth learning. And I'm going to put in the time to learn it over a long period of time, if that happens to be the case that I fall into. And so once I adopted this mindset, it kind of made me relax a little bit more. Instead of studying for a test for 48 hours straight, right? And then taking the test like some people would do in high school or in college, I was able to lay out a way more realistic plan and feel way less stressed about the things that I had to do to tackle all the things that I had to learn. Instead of having to learn an entire curriculum overnight, I now had to learn a curriculum over 6 months, 3 months, whatever my timeline might be. And so once I made that mental adjustment in my head, it became way more comfortable trying to study for these interviews, and it also became way more bearable in terms of the stress that I might have been under. The next thing that I learned that goes hand in hand with the first point is I tried to just do a little bit every single day. And like I said before, earlier on in my career, I would get an interview, I'd schedule it for a week later, and then I would sort of continuously study throughout that week to try and make sure that I had seen all the questions that company had asked and known all those solutions for those different problems. But now what I tried to do was I tried to understand and really just break down the things that I had to do before the interviews. So instead, what I started doing is I started scheduling my interviews a little bit further out. And so maybe now I had a month to study for my interview. And then I try and understand what I need to learn between today and next month to actually pass that interview. So maybe I would break down the fact that I had 4 topics that I really had to study and learn. And so I would spend a week on each topic. And that way I really could break down my studying into more bite-sized pieces. Instead of saying I have to learn these hundreds of questions that I might be asked in a month, I really just broke it down into, okay, here are 4 different topics that I need to master before the next month to actually be able to pass this interview. Once I was able to do that, studying becomes so much more manageable. You're not nearly as stressed sort of going into the day to study. The other thing that I did trying to study a little bit every single day is I just set a number of questions I wanted to tackle every single day. So for me, I tried to set a goal of 3 problems every single day that I had to solve to actually be able to progress towards passing the technical interview that I was preparing for. And eventually, depending on your comfort level, you guys can change this. It's not one size fits all. You guys can take this and modify it however you want. I think eventually I started doing 5 problems a day, but if it took me 30 minutes to solve 5 problems a day, I would be done. That was my studying, and I would just get it out of the way, and I would solve those number of questions every single day. And by doing a little bit every single day, it really compounded, and it made me way more comfortable as opposed to trying to sort of sprint towards the finish line and get to that interview and just rush through all the material. I really felt like by going through it slowly and methodically, I was able to actually prepare better in a way that would help me pass during that technical interview that was coming up. And so in this way, studying really reminds me of going to the gym. I think if you slowly but surely train and you go to the gym every day or several times a week, you're really going to see that progress. Maybe not the first day, maybe not the second day, but slowly and surely you're going to see those results. You're going to start gaining muscle, you're going to start leaning out. Whatever your goal is, you're going to see that if you just continuously move towards it, right? If you are methodical and you plan, you're going to see the results. Whereas if you sort of go into the gym and stay there for 6 hours in a singular day and you do 800 bicep curls, you're not going to wake up with massive biceps. That's just not really how it works. And I think the studying here is exactly the same. You're not necessarily going to be able to sit down, study for 8 hours, and then know all this material. What you really need to do is actually set a goal of doing a little bit every single day, because that effort is going to compound and it's going to help you be successful over the long run. Again, it might not be in a week that you'll see the results, but slowly and surely, over a month, over 2 months, over 3 months, over a year, if you keep up with this stuff, you're really going to be in a good place to pass these technical interviews, in my opinion. The third thing that I really thought about and I internalized was that it's not about the number of questions that you solve. And I want to repeat that because people, I think especially online, have this weird notion that you need to solve X number of questions to get into these larger companies, and that cannot be further from the truth. It's kind of ironic, but I feel like the number of people that actually care about the number of questions you've solved are actually tend to be the people who probably know the topic less. And that might sound counterintuitive, but I do think that oftentimes the people who are super interested or super focused on how many questions they solve are oftentimes the people who are just solving questions to inflate their numbers. Like, doesn't even make sense. Like, to me, I'm like, if you solve 500 leak code questions, I would have hoped that you could have stopped after 300, after 200, or whatever the number might be. I feel like at a certain point, you can actually recognize all these different patterns. And that's why I think some people make lists as like, here's 50 problems to learn, or here's 100 problems to go through, because you don't need to do 500, right? There's only so many patterns and topics that you sort of need to recognize during these interviews. And so at a certain point, if you've done 700, I don't think that necessarily helps you more after the 300th problem. And in that sense, it's sort of like the laws of diminishing returns or whatever it's called. Like when you have 20 ice creams, like the 20th isn't as good. I kind of think it's the same here. Like if you've solved 500 problems, how good are the last half of those problems? Like 1 to 250 is probably pretty effective, but 251 to 500, you're probably not getting as much out of every single problem that you solve, because I think, again, you need to recognize those patterns. And at a certain point, I don't think solving 400 questions is really the answer. So try and focus again on not a number of problems, but focus on what you need to learn, and then do as many problems as you need to learn those different topics and concepts. The fourth thing that I really focused on trying to do was doing mock interviews, because I think no matter how good you are at solving different problems, if you can't practice how you play, you're probably going to fail. And so I think knowing how to solve these different problems and then being able to solve these problems under a time constraint while some random stranger is asking you a riddle, basically, is totally different than you sitting in your home on your couch with your legs kicked up, watching Netflix and trying to solve two-sum. It's just different, And so I think one thing that I really did that was super helpful for me is I started doing mock interviews, especially closer to my interviews. I did multiple mock interviews every single week. I was lucky enough to have my friend Alpern help me, and I helped him during his interviews. But I definitely recommend that you guys try and practice how you play and do mock interviews constantly. Practicing how you play and actually going through the time constraint and the pressure of someone random who you've never talked to, probably asking you questions that are hard, is really difficult. And I think it's super worth practicing, because practicing and actually performing during these interviews really don't line up one-to-one. And so you really need to make sure that you're actually practicing in the environment that you're going to be in. When I would practice my questions with Alpern, I would definitely make sure that my phone is off, that I'm alone, that I have 45 minutes to focus wholeheartedly on a singular task. I would act like I've never known Alpern. He would give me a tough problem. He would not give me any hints, maybe. I would try and make the practice harder than the actual interview, so that hopefully when I did these mock interviews with Alpern that were really hard, I would go into the interview and they'd only be easier for me. So try and find a friend and do mock interviews, because they're super essential to actually passing your interviews. If you guys are not fortunate enough to be able to find a mock interview partner, this is definitely where our sponsor of today's video, interviewing.io, will help out. So if you're looking to get hired at some of the largest tech companies like Fang, be sure to check out interviewing.io, where you can practice realistic coding interviews with some of the most senior vetted engineers in the industry, totally anonymously. By using their service after every single interview you do on Interviewing.io, you're actually able to get actionable feedback from your interviewer to understand what you need to improve on to hopefully pass your technical interviews. Booking an interview with Interviewing.io is super simple, and you guys can actually book with as little as 24 hours notice so that you guys can start practicing with an experienced engineer today. And the absolute best part, my favorite part of the service, is that you guys actually don't have to pay a single cent until you guys get hired. So if you guys are interested in checking out the service and practicing mock interviews to get better at technical interviews, be sure to check out Interviewing.io. The link will be in the description below. And thank you so much to Interviewing.io for sponsoring the video today. The last thing that I really did to learn and to actually pass my technical interviews was I started approaching my studying in an order that made sense. I felt that before, when I was just memorizing solutions to problems and sort of just casting that wide net to make sure that I've seen all the different problems that a company might ask, I sort of just went by frequency. And so regardless of what the topic was that the problem might cover, I just went down the line and just tried to find all the different questions that that company asked, and I tried to memorize their solutions, which is bad. So this time around, when I started getting better at my technical interviews, what I did was I made a roadmap that made sense. I started with easier problems and I moved on to harder problems and topics as I learned those different things. And what this allowed me to do was it really allowed me to build a solid foundations in my data structures and algorithm skills, as opposed to sort of jumping between A to B, B to C, in an order that really just didn't make any sense for actually learning these topics and mastering them in a way that would allow me to pass my interviews. And in this way, it's really a lot like math. Like if you don't understand basic arithmetic, you're probably gonna have some trouble doing calculus problems. And so when you compare what I was doing before to what I started doing later, it really didn't make any sense. Like I wasn't gonna find any success by just jumping around random topics and problems without actually understanding all the underlying concepts beneath the topic that might be required for that specific problem. And for example, like I would be doing top-down dynamic programming problems, but I actually didn't understand how to do memoization or recursion. And so if that doesn't make any sense to you, you guys probably need to go study. But that's exactly what I'm saying, is that I would actually start doing these things that were all the way up here. And in reality, I didn't understand the 3 different things that were necessary to understand that higher level topic. And even though I didn't know that, I just didn't care. I was just like, here's the question, here's the topic, here's the solution, next question. And that's bad. That's really, really bad. And that was not conducive for my studying. It was not conducive for my learning. And it definitely was not conducive or helpful in helping me pass my technical interviews. So again, those are the 5 different things that I did to learn how to pass my technical interviews. And I think those 5 things would be super, super helpful in helping you guys pass your interviews as well. So again, those 5 different things that I did: having the right mindset, practicing a little bit every single day, focusing on learning topics, not solving a certain number of problems, practicing and doing mock interviews, and approaching problems in an order that made sense, and learning topics in an order that made sense, as opposed to sort of jumping around between a bunch of different ones randomly. So if you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please be sure to leave the video a like and subscribe to the channel for more. And I'll see you guys next time.